Good evening. Thank you for having me. So the delegation to Kurdistan, as you know, comes on the heels of Deputy Secretary Blinken's visit in Baghdad. And he's coming to shore up all of the details of the U.S. and anti-ISIL coalition effort against Mosul that we'll expect to be seeing in the near future. Sure. So I think Washington will want to achieve a couple of things speaking to Kurdish leaders. The first is that militarily they'll want to prepare for the fight in Mosul with the Kurds, who are some of the most effective fighters on the ground, and to coordinate and make sure that the plans are together going into the attack on Mosul. Secondly, I think they are preparing for the next steps in Mosul. So what happens after, for example, ISIS is driven out? People are going to be flooding out of Mosul and going into surrounding areas. What could the potential effect be for Iraqi Kurdistan? I think they're probably discussing that as well. So the relations between the U.S. and the Hashd Shabi and the other Shia militias have been somewhat complicated. And quite often we've seen the U.S. try not to coordinate directly in support of those groups. Often the coordination ends up being informal, and sometimes both sides benefit regardless. I think the U.S. will follow a similar pattern for Mosul. I don't think they will coordinate directly with the Shia militias, and I think they'll try to avoid contact with them altogether. And I think they'll try to coordinate most closely with the Iraqi security forces and the Kurdish forces as well. I think they'll probably try to avoid interacting with the Shia groups as much as possible. I think part of the reason the U.S. is concerned about Kurdish unity is they see the Kurds as really central to this, what you might call a final battle against ISIS, or at least the final major battle against ISIS in Iraq. And so I think the administration wants to make sure that the Kurds are as strong and unified as possible going into that final attack. And particularly, as I mentioned before, if there's any flow of refugees out of Mosul into the surrounding areas, I think they want to make sure the situation in Kurdistan is as stable as possible to prevent any further humanitarian catastrophes. So that's the question that the United States is trying to figure out right now. And it's one of the most difficult ones. Obviously, the Kurds in the north have gained much more territory than they started with before ISIL was active in Iraq. And so I think part of what both the Kurds and the central government will have to figure out after that fight, assuming that it goes well, is who is going to govern, where will Mosul fall? It's so close to Kurdistan. Will it be managed by the Kurds for a time or permanently? And so I think part of what the U.S. and its partners in the region will have to figure out is who is going to administer that city and who's going to see the transition away from ISIL in that city. For the other partners in the region, I think there are going to be difficult questions as far as the relations with Iran and Turkey, who are both concerned about their Kurdish populations. I think the outcome of any talks between the Kurdish government and the Iraqi central government will be watched very closely by Iraq's neighbors. I think there's going to have to be a really serious rebuilding phase in Mosul. I imagine that the attack, as we've seen in some of the other cities throughout Iraq and also in Syria, is going to leave the city potentially devastated. And so there will be a major concern about who is going to help rebuild the city, who's going to handle administrative control. I think from a U.S. perspective that I can provide here, they're going to have to make decisions about who is going to administer. They're going to have to try and help influence the process of who will administer the city. Is it going to be the Iraqi central government or the Kurds? Right now, I think it's hard to say what Mosul will look like exactly once ISIL is out of the territory, because we're not sure how the fight will go. But I think there will be a big rebuilding phase. I think they'll try to prevent any humanitarian crises, and they'll try to restore the infrastructure and buildings in the city really quickly after the fall. So I think what we've seen in statements from Mr. Blinken and from other policymakers is kind of a shying away from taking a strong opinion on that recently. What most policymakers have been saying is that they expect the United States to defeat ISIS with the help of the Kurds and the central government, and then really they expect the matter of Kurdish independence and the Kurdistan's role in the country and future of Iraq to be left to the people of the country. So I think it'll be a matter that the U.S. tries to stay out of as much as possible, but it will be kind of difficult given the degree to which the Kurds have been so effective in the anti-ISIL campaign. I think the United States will be assessing the situation on the ground pretty closely, and what I think most policymakers will probably be looking at is a position of strength for the Kurds that's maybe unmatched so far in their history. The Kurds are coming off of territorial gains that are huge. They've almost doubled their territory by about 50%. And so compared to Baghdad, they're in a very strong bargaining position. Now the question of whether that's for greater autonomy or greater oil revenue with exports from the Kurdistan region, that's a question, that's something for them to consider from a new bargaining position where they might be able to squeeze some power out of the government. So I think there's been recognition in both campaigns that Kurds are some of the most effective fighters against the Islamic State. But it's kind of hard to say given how vastly different the candidates' stances on Syria and Iraq are. I think if we were to see a Clinton presidency, we'd see something very similar to what's going on now. I think a Trump presidency is a little bit of a wild card. He said things ranging from we should stay out of the region to we'll carpet bomb. So I think that Trump is a little bit of a wild card. I think if it's Clinton, we'll see some consistency to what's going on now. Thank you very much for